Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, January the 22nd. Back from the brink, Britain, Denmark and the rest are breathing a sigh of relief after Donald Trump backed off over the threat to take Greenland by force and also cancelled the new tariff threat after the head of NATO appeared to hammer out a deal over a so-called framework for the future of the Arctic. Was this the week tacos got served? Trump always chickens out. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico here at Davos.
And my name's Sam Coates of Sky News. This week's NATO near-death experience and the absolute unreliability of the US as a key ally for Britain raises absolutely fundamental questions about this country's place in the world and where its priorities should be. Questions over relations with Europe, questions over defence spending. But I don't feel like we're any further forward in answering any of them, even though the events of this week have dominated.
And next week, too, will be devoted to overseas rather than domestic issues. Keir Starmer is off for a quite lengthy trip to the Far East, including that long-promised trip to China. So maybe some of the answers, Sam, to your question about Britain's place in the world will become a bit more apparent.
Yeah, I don't really feel that much is moving terribly further forward back at home, where things look a bit stuck. Earlier this week, I asked whether the U-turns and the climb downs meant that Keir Starmer could truly be said to have the confidence of the House of Commons. Well, last night showed that he absolutely can't command a majority of the House of Lords.
A whopping great defeat for peers, led by the Tories, who want the government to hurry up and ban social media for the under-16s by 261 to 150, so not even close. It feels all but inevitable that the government is being forced into something it spent the back half of 2025 telling us insistently that it didn't want to do.
So in decidedly glass half empty mood this morning, I
can tell.
Ask a big picture question. Will January simply end up being a wasted month politically? You know, taco Trump attention seeking, as you say, a series of U-turns. By the way, I think we might get pubs today and possibly rumours of help for grassroots music tomorrow. But all of that is just sort of sticking plasters on the business rates problem that the government's created for themselves. No sense through the whole of January that the big issues of British politics that need solving are closer to resolution, whether that's on courts or the asylum backlog or the send reforms. There's a cost of living focus, and the cost of living is going up, and despite what the Prime Minister is campaigning about. So what has the government actually achieved all this month? Meanwhile, pretty much every one of the Labour MPs I've talked to in the last fortnight still thinks that Keir Starmer is a goner, certainly before the next election, probably this year. I mean, I think the party is just in a massively different place to the rest of the country and to other people. But if that happens, all of those big issues that I was talking about, well, they simply won't get fixed. They'll probably, in any meaningful way, there'll be another year before they start being tackled, because that's the consequence if we change Prime Minister. I do think that the Labour Party is sort of out of step with the rest of the country in terms of, a conversation about, do we need to change Prime Minister?
Right. Well, that is your glass half empty on the view of Keir Starmer. But I would just say, Sam, it's not the view of business, because they're really not around here crying out for a change of leadership. And that is reflected in a survey today reported by Bloomberg, showing that British business leaders want Labour to keep Starmer nailed on in his post. Just under 50%, 48 of 500 executives said an internal challenge to Keir Starmer would pose a serious risk to their business, according to research by Bradshaw Advisory. That's 1 in 5 financial service leaders rated the prospect of a Starmer ouster as a risk that would have a major impact. So the entrepreneurial classes seem more risk averse than perhaps a lot of people observing Keir Starmer, and even Labour MPs who are definitely selling shares, aren't they?
Absolutely. Look, the point being made in this Bradshaw Advisory survey is that if you do go through a leadership contest, then the hypothetical alternative leaders may not be the most pro-business people possible, and that the party won't pick the most pro-business candidate. And that's the thing that's ringing some alarm bells. You've been around business leaders in Davos this week. What do you think their attitude is to the British government?
Well, on Starmer, I would say from here, and let's be honest, is that it's a bubble. It's kind of the biggest bubble you can be in, but it feels very distant from what's going on back in London in some ways. But if you're not here as leader, the conversation does tend to ignore you. It's one reason I would say, as a bit of a modest Davos veteran, I think prime ministers and chancellors should lock arms and attend together, Sam. I think when you just put out your finance minister, Rachel Reeves, I saw yesterday, in fact, she was in a studio next to me during the Trump speech. She was obviously pushing out her message, but you're not really making the impact here that perhaps other countries are making. France sending Macron and he sort of rocked the place a bit, Mark Carney from Canada, etc. So there's that small local factor. But I think just more broadly, there's a sense that we heard from the economist Ken Rogoff yesterday on the podcast and in a bigger interview I've done, that they think Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are kind of okay. They worry a lot more about the party being pulled leftwards if backbenchers start to effectively take control of Labour in power. But I think what they were missing as well, I mean, it's quite interesting for Rachel Reeves, we started talking about pubs and business rates at Davos, where the pubs would be serving premier crew. It does feel like they're missing a plan for the UK to do something big.
So who would they want to see?
Well, I've got a curveball for you on this one, because it certainly came as a curveball to me. Two major UK figures who run advisories, international consultancies, have really big firms on their books that they talk to. They should say they were giving personal opinions and these were just private views. They said, drum roll, Angela Rayner. Well, I nearly dropped my late night non-alcoholic beer because I hadn't realized, Sam, that Angela has fans in these circles. And the argument of one of these figures, who deals, as I say, with a lot of top entrepreneurs around the world, was that Trump and the reaction and the fact that Davos was all about Donald Trump this week had shown us, and the fact that there was this strong sense that it was all about Donald Trump at Davos. He made the weather this week. This is not a politics as usual era, this person said. She had the best chance of creating a narrative and getting public attention to see off reform. She was a better natural counterpart to Nigel Farage than some trad candidate from the murky middle. And she could create a story. Also reflected something I hadn't realized, that when she was in post as deputy leader, she was very, very keen to do more foreign travel. That I do remember. She wanted to go to the US and make some friends on the international circuit. So that's why she's got these connections. And frankly, they just quite like her. They think we need something that's a bit less. You asked me what would make the difference. Maybe there's a bit of a sense that the UK is a little bit sour-faced. I see the Chancellor here. She looks a little bit worried. She was in a hurry, running past you. It's a bit like, oh, God, can the UK just cheer up a bit? And that may be leading to the what about Ange effect.
Oh, that's absolutely fascinating. She needs to get her tax affairs sorted out before she can get back into frontline British politics.
There is that.
However, and she's not very popular with the public, our polling found at the end of last year, but maybe she can improve that over time. Okay, that's the context of where you are, but the geopolitics are the most important thing, this backtrack by Donald Trump. Can you just give us your read on what you think happened yesterday and kind of where that leaves Britain?
For me, the most telling thing about this extraordinary afternoon where we got that Trump speech, it was a mix of rambling, it was very funny in parts, but it was also in equal parts, sometimes more threatening. That really unnerved Davos, that sense that Donald Trump just sees himself now as, I think, so kind of antagonistic towards major global institutions, and grudging about NATO, negative about Europe, etc. That sense of perpetual threat. And more than on any other global issue that I've seen him tackle, this obsession with Greenland has shifted, I think, a mood here. My US colleague, Nahal Tusi, covering it, from the Trump side, she said his appearance had broken some big brains, because the reversal was a relief in some ways. You said, Sam, at the top of the podcast, it was maybe a wasted couple of weeks on the Greenland issue, but my goodness, for a foreign policy establishment reeling from that threat, one leading American business figure, household name in the States, said that it was like reeling off the ropes in a boxing bout, and particularly on tariffs from their point of view. So that sense that Trump is just getting more and more erratic, I hear a lot of worries about that. Keir Starmer, on the other hand, if you look at what happened yesterday, they will chalk it up as a win for behind-the-scenes diplomacy and talking down Donald Trump from his high horse. Jonathan Powell was around looking very stern a couple of days ago. I think they'll be quite happy that we're not in a bigger crisis, and that Mark Rutte, the NATO boss, seemed at the end, to have got Donald Trump to a better place. Was it then more glass half full?
I am aware of British government attempts to talk up their role in getting Donald Trump to a more sensible place, although it does look as if Keir Starmer, absent from the pitch, a recipient of a drive-by shooting on Monday over the Chagos Islands, I'm not sure that I carry that much credence to the idea that plucky Britain played a crucial role here. The hero of the hour for all of these countries seems to be Mark Rutte, the NATO boss, as far as I can see. But Foreign Office types always give it a go. So well done.
Can I sort of push back a bit on that, Sam?
Of course.
Right, I'm not saying it'd be a very unusual day in which, as many of our those who know us in Number 10, that we're not acting in any sense as their spokesman, usually being a bit more critical. But yes, okay, it's Rutte who did it, but it's Mark Rutte, the NATO boss, who will have been talking in detail to Keir Starmer, probably also to Jonathan Powell. And remember, the European narrative this week is, right, up with this, we cannot put any more. We have to start talking about retaliatory tariffs. We talked about it on the podcast. I've been talking about it with my European colleagues. We have to get ready for this. We're going to war with Donald Trump on this because he's going so bonkers that we're going to have to really, go there with retaliation. And Britain stood aside from that. So whether or not it was plucky little Britain that made the key difference, you're right to be sceptical. But actually the position Britain ended up in has turned out, at least for now, to be the right one. You didn't need to go towards retaliatory tariffs if Trump cancels his threat. So, I am going to give a bit of credence there.
One more question on that, though, Anne. Was the threat of Europe engaging with the question of retaliatory tariffs not part of Trump's decision to back down? How do we know that Britain standing aside was a big contributory factor to the U-turn? Wasn't the prospect of a trade war, as it was with China, something that encouraged Donald Trump to tiptoe away in the way that we have seen him do in the past?
I think there's also, frankly, that the Greenland policy was going down quite badly in parts of MAGA and in parts of his own world, which is one thing my American colleague was pointing out. It's not just the heads hurting of the liberal elites, but a lot of people quite close to Trump saying, some people are in your ear on this, but you've gone a bit too far in the electorate, don't like it in midterms. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That threat of getting into a big trade war, I'm sure that played a role. So if you're from the European perspective, you'll say, it was we what won it. But, I do think Rutte, that relationship that he made by, to put it very impolitely, sucking up to Trump, has played a major role. And I think the UK has been quite close to Mark Rutte as he made his calculations about how to get through this week. And in the end, it's how the sausage gets made. But, that's the way the sausage came out that matters. And we're out of the crisis that looked like we might be in 2 days ago, ... For now. Another episode will be ahead in the Trump drama.
I do wonder where this leaves sort of the UK diplomatically. There's a fascinating piece in the New Statesman this week just suggesting there are people around Keir Starmer that are, as we've previously reflected as well, keen to push him in a more pro-EU direction. Whether or not the absolute unreliability of Donald Trump does kind of accelerate that conversation, or whether or not the fact that Britain very much didn't want to be part of that more aggressive European retaliation pushes us in another direction. There are those who say that they expect Keir Starmer to move crab-like to a more sort of pro-EU stance over the coming weeks and months. You've got cabinet ministers, Peter Kyle, interestingly, saying that joining a customs union wouldn't solve Britain's problems quickly. Do you think this has fundamentally changed where we are and how we look at ourselves?
Well, I think it is absolutely a correct focus to look at what does this government really want in terms of alignment with the EU. And so the trouble is, you've got one group of people in this church, like, for whom the customs union, this is the item of veneration, this is the devotional object, is the customs union. I think it was you pointed out, Sam, yesterday, that had we been in the customs union, of course, we would not have had any independence at all, really, in terms of these tariffs and retaliation. We would have just had to go along with or be part of any European pushback had it come to that. And I think at the same time, you have those who would like more reconnection. I'm sure Peter Kyle is one of them, and Keir Starmer too, who is saying, well, yeah, this, for a start, wouldn't bring any benefits very soon. I must say, I still have any doubts about whether the customs union itself would drive growth, which seems to be the big argument underneath this. So I think overall, particularly given the way that the US is now conducting itself in this erratic way, you can see why there'll be this pro-European push inside Labour. The trouble is they seem to be, if you like, they have two kinds of Europe in their head, or British relationship with Europe that they're pursuing, and they diverge. So they end up having another internal Labour conflict rather than a set destination that they're trying to get to.
Fascinating. I can see Keir Starmer being pulled in both directions and consequently going nowhere at the moment. But let's see.
You always with the optimism.
Yeah, just the conversations with Labour folk this week have not left me thinking that we are powering ahead with a set of solutions that are going to solve the problems of this country, I have to say, which is rather infecting my tone on things. Right, what a brilliant week.
Can I try and cheer you up with something from here that I think you would please like? So I'm going to try to book you to do another year with me. The most interesting person, there's a question people always ask, Davos was really irritated with, what's the most surprising thing you've heard? And it's usually something about developments in, agentic AI and fake meat or something. But actually, I bumped into a lady last night called Samantha Michelle, who is basically the queen of the Davos disco scene. She flies around the world. She's one of those amazing, highly paid DJs who goes around doing late night parties. And she DJs for the Wall Street Journal, which to me sounds like, talk about a contradiction in terms, but she's great fun. So she's starting to DJ tonight because it's getting towards the end. So everyone who does that kind of thing is going out. She starts at midnight, which is, if you're on this podcast, when you want to be having your cocoa. But I just thought it was brilliant to have her. She was doing Arabian Night. She was doing a sort of Middle East themed DJ sets last night, and tonight she's out and about doing something else. But I love the idea of flying to and fro from LA to New York to Davos, DJing, and I think that might cheer you up a bit, right? Because I think you need cheering up this morning.
Okay, we need to have a Sam and Anne's party, and Samantha Michelle needs to come up and DJ for us. Brilliant.
I think we'd better start saving now, actually.
Obviously, that's the last podcast you've got to do this week. So Anne McElvoy, unleashed and unbound tonight on the Davos dance floor, will be a sight to behold. We will see you on Monday for the next Politics at Sam and Anne's. Have a brilliant rest of the time in Davos. It's been a great week to have you at the heart of the action. So we will see you then.
I'll see you then, Sam. Back down from the heights.